Let's first of all talk about how do you construct the unit circle. I think it's easier to start with the multiples of 45 degrees, so I'm going to do a very small line that goes right, cuts each quadrant right in half. Alright, and so to start with, these are multiples of 45 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and start. This would be 0 degrees. This is 45 degrees. This would be 90 degrees. If you had 90 and 45, you get 135 degrees. 180 degrees. If you add 45 to 180, you get 225. Then down here would be 270. And then if you add 45 to that, you get 315. 45 to that, and you get 360. So before I continue with doing all the degrees, let's do even do the radian measures for our 45 degree increments. So if you think about in radian measures, you start with 0, and because the circumference of a circle is 2 pi r, and the radius of a unit circle is 1, that means that all the way around the circle would be 2 pi. So you'd start with 0 radians, and then all the way at the end you'd have 2 pi, which means if you cut that in half, this over here would be pi radians. And if you look between 0 and pi, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different sections. So we're going to say that each one of them is 1/4 of a pi, or we'll count them as pi over 4. So in this part right here, I'm going to put pi over 4. At the very top would be 2 pi over 4. That reduces, so I can go ahead and reduce and put the reduced one in here. It's pi over 2. So I have pi over 4, 2 pi over 4. Then right here, this would be 3 pi over 4. Right here at pi would be 4 pi over 4. Then right here at this one, it would be 5 pi over 4. And then down here would be 6 pi over 4, which would reduce to be 3 pi over 2. And then right here would be 7 pi over 4. And then of course here would be 8 pi over 4, which we already reduced to 2 pi. So there's all of our multiples of 45. As we consider all the multiples of 45, their coordinates, if this is the origin and it's got a radius of 1, the coordinate right here would be 1, 0. Let's do the quadrantal angle. So this would be 1, 0. At the top here would be 0, 1. Over here at pi would be negative 1, 0. Down here at 3 pi over 2 would be 0, negative 1. Now let's go ahead and do right in the middle of each quadrant. This would be square root of 2 over 2, square root of 2 over 2. Remember in the first quadrant the signs are positive, positive. In the second quadrant they're negative, positive. The third quadrant x is negative, y is negative. And in the fourth quadrant x is positive, y negative. So if you went straight across over here on your multiples of 45, this coordinate's going to be just the same but with a different sign. So this would be negative square root of 2 over 2, square root of 2 over 2. And if you went straight down here, the same coordinate, but both of them are going to be negative. So negative square root of 2 over 2, negative square root of 2 over 2. And if you went straight across here, exactly the same, but the x's are positive and the y's are negative. Alright, so now we've completed every multiple of 45 degrees. So our next thing we'll do is we'll talk about all the multiples of 30 degrees. So first we'll do it in degrees. So we start here, we have 0 degrees, this would be 30 degrees, 60 degrees, we already have 90. If you add 30 to 90, we get 120 degrees, we get 150 degrees, 180, 210, 240, 270, which I already have, 300, and 330. And then of course we already had 360. Suppose we take a different marker, and this time let's mark all of our, just draw a line from the origin to every multiple of 30 degrees. So in doing that, it just kind of illustrates if from 0 halfway around the circle is pi, then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces between, like in the top half of the circle. So since there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of pi, we'll count by pi over 6. So the first one right here would be, we start with 0 of course, then this would be pi over 6. This one here would be 2 pi over 6, but it reduces to be pi over 3. Then 2 pi over 6, this one here is 3 pi over 6, which we already reduced. This one here would be 4 pi over 6, which reduces to be 2 pi over 3. Then this one here would be 5 pi over 6. Pi itself would be 6 pi over 6. Of course, we already reduced it to pi. The next one would be 7 pi over 6. Then we would have 8 pi over 6, but that reduces to be 4 pi over 3. We'd have 9 pi over 6, which we already reduced to be 3 pi over 2. We would have 10 pi over 6, which reduces to be 5 pi over 3. And then we would have 11 pi over 6. So now we've got the radians, the degrees. Only thing we have left to do are just our coordinates for all the multiples of 30 degrees. The only points left, the only coordinates we have left, in the total unit circle, all you have is 0, 1/2, square root of 2 over 2, square root of 3 over 2, and 1. These are the only coordinates you have anywhere on the unit circle at all. We've already used 0 and 1. We use, since the middle of the quadrant, square root of 2 over 2, we use those in the middle of the quadrants. So what I have left are 1/2 and square root of 3 over 2. Square root of 3 over 2 is bigger, 1/2 is smaller. So if you consider the coordinate right here, you go over a lot, like if you made it into a triangle here. You go over a lot and up a little. So since you go over more than you go up, we'll let the biggest part be x. So we would put square root of 3 over 2 and then up 1/2. Over square root of 3 over 2, up 1/2. If you went straight across over here, it's going to be exactly the same coordinate because it's the same distance from the x-axis. So this would be negative square root of 3 over 2, positive 1/2. If you go 30 degrees south of the x-axis, this would be negative square root of 3 over 2, negative 1/2. If you went straight across this way, this would be positive square root of 3 over 2, negative 1/2, because in this quadrant, x is positive, y is negative. Alright, almost done. As you do the 60-degree one up here, it's like you go over a little and up a lot. So you go over 1/2 and you go up square root of 3 over 2. So notice it's very similar to this one here, except you just go over a little and up a lot. So same deal over here, but this will be negative 1/2, positive square root of 3 over 2. Down here will be negative 1/2, negative square root of 3 over 2. And then straight over here will be positive 1/2 and negative square root of 3 over 2. And we have our entire unit circle done.